The first of 4 FIDE Grand Prix tournaments started in Baku on Thursday, and I'd like to take you through one of the games from round 1. First of all, I should say it's an incredibly strong lineup. We have Fabiano Caruana is the top-rated player in the tournaments. We have Grishuk, Andreikin, Mamedyarov, Nakamura, and they're all fighting for a place in the candidates tournament. The top 2 players at the end of these 4 Grand Prix tournaments will qualify for the next candidates tournament that will decide the challenger for the World Championship match in 2016. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, and let's come back to round 1 of the Baku FIDE Grand Prix tournament. And I'd like to look at the game between Boris Gelfand and Dmitry Andreikin. Gelfand, one of the oldest players in the tournament, but as we know, he managed to qualify for a World Championship match against Anand a couple of years ago, and was very, very unlucky actually not to win. D4 from Gelfand, E6 from Andreikin. So that's inviting Gelfand to play E4 and go into a French defence, but Gelfand sticks to his D4 openings. And now we're transposing back into a very normal position, and Andreikin, of course, has a big choice here, but decides to go for the Queen's Indian. So the bishop comes out to the long diagonal and controls the E4 square. So this is mainline position, and here the most common move is bishop E7 followed by castles. Bishop E4 check is also possible. But instead Andreikin played C5. Now this is a known move, it's not quite as common as bishop E7. And it's a tricky move actually. Well, first of all I should say, if white wants to keep things relatively calm, then he can play into a hedgehog position, which is a very standard position actually. But the way to try to exploit the drawbacks of C5 is to play D5. So this is the known standard move in this position for white, to try to take advantage of black's slightly funny move order. So black exchanges. And now the standard move here for white is to play knight h4. But recently black has been faring quite well with g6. Michael Adams, for example, has been playing this with black with some success. Okay, it's a different kettle of fish. But Gelfand, theoretically he's actually very well prepared. And instead of knight h4, he played pawn takes pawn. And this, of course, is a pawn sacrifice. And, well, it's coming to the fore just recently, actually. It's being investigated. Let's go through a few moves. Well, first of all, if you decline to take this pawn and play, say, d6, then white simply gets a very promising Benoni position because these moves aren't strictly necessary. So that's definitely good for white. So really black has to take this pawn. Now, knight takes is not very strong because after knight h4, this pin is decisive. So white wins a piece. So really, the only move that black has is to take the pawn on d5. So knight c3. So this is a pure pawn sacrifice. But white has very good development, and as we'll see, black has certain structural defects as well. Now, black could play it simply here and exchange pieces. But in giving up the bishop pair, then white has obvious compensation. And you can see white's bishops are absolutely superb here. And with this pawn advanced here, then it means the squares on the d-file here are very weak. So white has very easy play just playing down the d-file and on the queen side. You could retreat the bishop to b7, but it is unprotected. So bishop c6 looks like the obvious move here, and that's what Andreikin played. So now e4 from Gelfand, so white claiming space in the centre, and again you can see that black has structural problems here because this pawn on c5 means that these squares here are somewhat weak. Now a critical move, I think, for both sides here is obviously what happens if this pawn on e4 is taken. I should say Andreikin declined to do this. Now white gets compensation by playing queen e2. So queen e7, protecting the bishop. And here, well, there are two moves. Rook e1 leads to an endgame, which is probably equal, but bishop f4 gives compensation. Now white is 2 pawns down, but he is castled and he has very, very clear and easy development. But 2 pawns is 2 pawns. I suspect this might be a position that might be investigated in the future in later games. Anyway, Andreikin declined to go in for that very sharp position. I think you'd need to be well prepared before you did that, and instead played d6. Gelfand castled, so bishop e7, and now knight h4, the most direct move, and this is an excellent move actually. Black could castle here. I mean, perhaps this is the best move, but after knight f5 this is still very unpleasant for black. You can see this knight is looming over into black's position, looking at these critical points. Now it could be that white will simply exchange and take that important bishop that protects the pawn on d6. Could be that white will attack the king. Could be simply bishop f4 to attack the pawn on d6. And this is a very pleasant position for white. So, I mean, in some ways, understandably, Andreikin played g6 to prevent the knight coming in, and now the knight looks a bit stranded on h4, but actually, as we'll see, the knight often plays a very strong role in white's attack. Bishop h6, an obvious move from Gelfand, so preventing black castling, and I mean, white's moves here are so easy to play. You know, you just want to play queen d2, put your rooks in the middle, it's a wonderful position. Andreikin wanted to do something about this bishop, but Gelfand was happy to exchange because that means this pawn is weaker, these dark squares are weaker, the king is displaced. Now e5 is an interesting move here, but Gelfand kept it very simple, very practical move, so perhaps looking to play queen h6, but also simply preparing to double on the d file. Andreikin preempted rook d1 and defended the d pawn, but I mean, look at white's position. Already, you know, we've forced this knight back to this miserable square on e8, where it cuts black's position in two. The king is still vulnerable. Black's development is absolutely rotten. I mean, I would say in practical terms, black is simply lost here already. Let's see how Gelfand did it. So the king tried to wander to a better position, and now f4, excellent move. So all white's pieces, really all white's pieces, are in play. These rooks coming into play, and you know, the f rook behind the f pawn is about to come into play. This knight on h4, which one could argue is maybe a little stranded, actually is about to play a very important role in the attack. Let's see what happens if black tries to develop with knight d7, then simply e5. Now that opens up the diagonal, so black exchanges. Now you can see this can't be captured because the knight is on prise, and I mean, this is just a terrible position. Black simply can't do anything very constructive, and well, white continues the attack. So Andreikin stepped out of the way with queen c8. Simple move, knight d5, just hammering in on this wonderful square, and you know, you never know, something like knight e7 could be happening. If black exchanges, then well, white swings over, and now you can see this knight is going to come into play over here, and I mean, this is a dreadful position for black. So Andreikin played rook f8, hoping to perhaps bring his king into the corner, but I'm afraid things didn't work out. White could simply play f5 here. This is a strong move, because if this pawn is blocked, then it means that white has a simple fork to win the pawn here. But instead, Gelfand played e5 first, opening up the line of the bishop. I mean, from a positional point of view, this of course makes great sense. This was taken, and now f5. So same idea with f5, but Gelfand does it in an even more elegant way, more positionally elegant, by opening up the line of the bishop, which sets up all kinds of horrible tactics later on. If black exchanges, then, well, queen d5 wins material. Bishop d5 is also absolutely terrible, and you can see that here the queen comes over, and once again this knight is going to take part in the attack, and it's just finished for black. And once again f6 is impossible because of simple tactics. Knight takes g6, and something terrible is going to happen here. So after f5, queen d8, Andreikin tried to plug some dark squares here, but it's really too late. f6 check. And, well, if the king goes in the corner, then this is just horrible. And now this wins. f7. Pawn goes through its mate. It's terrible. So Andreikin took this. Well, Gelfand can win this in so many different ways. You could just take this knight off, but instead he went for mate. Why not? Why not finish it quickly? If this is taken, then queen g5 and knight f6, and remember that's happening, and this is happening. It's just terrible. So the king went in the corner, but this was no better. Queen h6 threatening mate, and now knight takes f6, and here Andreikin resigned. If queen f6, then knight d6 is really the end, followed by knight takes f7. I mean, what a crushing victory. Gelfand really didn't have to break at all with his attack. And really a very poor performance from Andreikin. It just shows what happens if you get caught out by a clever opening idea. Sometimes it's just impossible to stop the attacker's initiative. I should, of course, mention that there was another decisive game in the first round. Fabiano Caruana had an excellent start. He beat Sergei Karyakin. Somehow it wasn't such an interesting game, but Karyakin just collapsed at a certain moment. But anyway, we shall follow Caruana's progress with interest in the tournament. I won't be reporting on every round, but I'll give you updates periodically. Thanks.